Hey, congratulations on your new short documentary, The Window on Death Door.
Yes, actually, the window on death row, though I
Oh, Death
love
Row.
that play on words because we're all at death's door, aren't we?
Yeah,
Let's
there
face
we
it.
go.
Uh, but the documentary really looks at what would you do with a second chance at life. So it looks at these themes of life and death and renewal in a deep way, a heavy way.
Well, more of also congratulations. You're currently doing the FYC campaign for the Academy Awards, trying to get this nominated here. How is that going with you?
I have to say I've come a long way because we are super indie, right? So our interview process was potato chips on an ironing board. I mean, that was craft services, 4 floor walk up, just doing the best we can with our skeleton crew, me and a DOP, Marco Castro. And then all of a sudden we're now, at screenings for the Academy. Mike Farrell, who is a wonderful actor and activist. You may know him from his MASH days, Captain BJ Honeycutt. He's come on and really supported the documentary because he's had 40 years of death penalty advocacy under his belt and just felt very moved by it, actually called it a prayer and has stepped in. And so we're moving from, the studio with the ironing board to now this beautiful screening room where there are so many engaged members of the Academy, people from various guilds, actors, activists, all coming together to really talk about the heart and soul of the story.
That is wonderful to hear, and it's such a great experience to go through this FYC campaign. But just like everyone, I have to ask the obligatory question is, how did this documentary first came about with you?
Okay, so ever since I was a little girl, I've always been drawn to finding that light or joy in the darkest of corners. And I took that with me through my career. I worked as a foreign correspondent in various developing countries, conflict zones, that I always found myself looking for the glimmers, the joy, the hope. It's just phenomenal and fascinating for me what we as people can tolerate and transcend. And so with this story, I didn't want to do your typical true crime death row story where all of a sudden the viewers are judge and jury and this person's guilty until proven innocent. And you're asking, did he do it? Did he not? Oh, gee, gather round. I wanted something that looked at how on earth do you sustain any sort of hope, any sort of joy, any sort of life force when the world is pushed against you. It's about Joaquín José Martínez, the first Spaniard exonerated from U.S. death row. And he was wrongfully convicted. There he is on death row. The world turned against him. And eventually it took him about 5 years, but he was indeed released. And now, 20 years later, that's really what we're looking at with this documentary. You see a man who is spiritually transformed. He's an activist. He's still coping with decades of trauma. How can you not from that experience? But he's giving back. He's really taken his trauma and he's transformed it to try to relieve the suffering of others. And to me, that is just powerful.
Tell me about finding Joaquin and trying to convince him to be part of this documentary.
Okay, I didn't have to convince him very, very much, but I'll tell you as well. So I'm a journalist. I came at this from a journalist perspective. So I did get a grant early on from an organization called the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. It's associated with Brandeis University. And so oftentimes you apply for grants as a journalist, as many as possible, and you see what'll stick. And you throw out these outlandish ideas because you want to get the grant. Okay, so I applied for this grant. It was about, they were looking for stories on recipients of chaplain care. So I applied for this grant and I say, I want to do a story, because again, I'm just drawn to these opportunities for light or joy or sustenance in these dark scenarios. I was like, I want to do a story on someone who was innocent, wrongfully convicted on death row, and thanks to their relationship with their chaplain and any sort of support, they found a way to move beyond and then look at the life and retrospectively look at that experience, that growth. Then I got the grant. And I was like, oh crap, I actually have to find this person. Does this person even exist? And I searched for, might have been a year and a half or so. And I spoke to dozens of chaplains, exonerees, phenomenal people. And I have just so much material of which I am eager to do many more projects, sort of sitting on it and waiting for the opportunity. But I just hadn't found the right person who fit into that concept, that idea. And I didn't, of course, want to force it, right? I was ensuring that I would kind of meet the terms of the grant, but also look for someone who honestly came to that on his own terms. And then someone said to me in passing, they're like, have you talked to Joaquin? Another exoneree. I was like, nope. I call him up. Not only is Joaquin the perfect fit, but he's in my backyard. So I had been interviewing exonerees across the US. I'm American, but I live in Spain, in Barcelona with my family. Joaquin's in Valencia. He's right there. And I'm raised Buddhist. I'm not Catholic, but I have to say at that moment, I'm kind of looking up at the sky like, all right, if you're up there, I guess we're doing this. Like, here we go. So it ended up becoming this richer story about this, trans or this cross-Atlantic standoff between Spain and the U.S. for Joaquin as someone who had dual nationality. So the story really took on an international thrust, and it was very convenient and easy to do as an indie filmmaker because he was literally in my backyard.
Wow, that's amazing. So in reality, you found him, didn't do much convincing, but did so it must be the other way of finding his chaplain to track down then.
Yeah, exactly. It was amazing because we linked him up to his chaplain. It was the reunion. So he hadn't spoken to his chaplain since he left death row. It had been about 20 years, as I had mentioned. And so we brought the two men together and their conversation. There was something just so powerful about it. When the way they put it is when you're two men who have been through this experience together of life and death, so close to it in essentially the trenches, you have a closeness that no time could dilute, right? And it's not just that. We're sitting in the room, and at the end of the conversation, after the two men had spoke very openly about some of their trauma and the nuances of that trauma too. Like Joaquin says, he would have been dead today if he hadn't gone to death row. So though he was traumatized by it, he sees in some ways the value of it, like that kind of deep level of conversation. And then at the end, the two men say to each other, I love you. And oh God, I was just behind the scenes in tears because of the richness of that, and also seeing these otherwise more macho men express this sentiment. And Joaquin explained to me, he's like, you say what you think when you feel it, and you just do it. That's how I live. That's how Brother Dale, the chaplain, lives. When you have been that close to death, you say what you feel. You say it today. And so I ran home, and of course I'm obnoxiously hugging my son and my husband and telling them I love them, right? Because there's an impulse there that I think is very valid.
Wonderful. And his family did he bring his family on board with that, or that was an idea that you wanted to come up with with a different type of perspective too?
I think it took time for us to build the comfort. We spent, hours and hours in conversation about how this story would be different, right? How we would look at kind of the more human side of this. How do you kind of capture that humanity on death row, the dissonance and the trueness of the authenticity of his experience? And I think after that time, he started to realize how important it was for him to bring his family into the story. And so there is a big scene where his sons are on screen. He's speaking about why the documentary is important to his family. I think it took time, and it really was coming from him because he felt that it fully then expressed the story in the way he wanted to tell it as well. I really felt this collaboration with him through that process. And what was most interesting to me is, first of all, he usually is very protective of his children, and understandably so, but they're getting old enough, 10, 11 and beyond, to understand and want to engage with their dad about this topic. And last week we screened, so that would be in November, we screened in Barcelona in La Modelo prison where we filmed. And he brought his whole family to see it, to see the film. They had never seen him present on death row. So he also participated in a panel. They hadn't yet seen the film. He himself, even though the film has been completed for nearly a year, he hadn't been able to see it as well until that moment because it was just too much emotionally for him. When I would fact check, I would send little clips or bits of audio. And so he's sitting there and he's, crying into a friend's arms as he watches it. And his family is emotionally taking it in. And there's just such a powerful release through that. And I'm just so glad I could be a part of that.
Can you share your process of communicating with your subjects to make them comfortable to talk about their trauma and memories?
Yeah. Well, so usually I have a camera. I'm what you call a one woman army. I started my career as a video journalist, a backpack journalist. So I would have the camera, the light, it was like that's how you do it. That's how you roll. And with this particular project, this was the first time I actually didn't find myself behind the camera. I wanted to really connect with this kind of subject matter and really make Joaquin feel as comfortable as possible or help him to feel as comfortable as possible. So I did collaborate with a DOP. It was fantastic. I'm so glad I did. And then I could connect with him and feel as he felt. Right. And so I think another thing that was critical for me is when I do these stories, these documentaries, it's important to me that my subjects are speaking from the position of kind of empowerment, not victimhood, that they're ready to tell their story. So before I start any shoot, whether I be interviewing a survivor, a refugee who survived being distressed at sea, I'm interviewing a war survivor or a death row exoneree, I ask, why are you doing this? Just to make sure it's okay for you. And I open the documentary with that and Joaquin's answer so that he affirms that to himself. He affirms that to the room. It's one thing. And I kind of leave that in as a bit of a dog whistle on ethical documentary filmmaking for other journalists and students. And it does come up in classroom conversations when I show the film, which I really appreciate. Another thing is I invited his wife to join us so she could sit on a couch nearby, and anytime he felt he needed a break, he could go to her, someone he didn't have to explain himself to. So we felt there was support. I had her in the room. And at one point, he does call out for her when he needs a break, and I made sure, again, to leave that in the documentary so people can also see that and understand the importance of that. When someone is speaking, even if it's been 20 years, when someone is speaking about such rich and difficult experiences.
Now, coming up with the shots, of them walking through the prison or the last meal trays or even the execution room, tell us about what you want people to feel when they see those type of images.
Huh. I think that there is this interesting experience when you're in the prison. Joaquin describes it well, this feeling of impotence, of powerlessness. And you can see it in his face. And the camera at one point, we discussed this shot for a while. You don't know when you're going into a documentary setting, are you going to accomplish the the visual goals that you have? You just have to be prepared, and maybe some brilliant strikes, and maybe the camera just stays flat on and there's an emotion you just simply can't leave the face or the scene for. But in this case, you'll see the camera and it rotates around and almost does a 360-degree rotation around Joaquin when he's talking about the powerlessness he feels in the prison or just how overwhelmed he is. And the camera is also capturing that. You don't know which direction to look. You don't know who you are anymore. Where is your anchor? So I think that was powerfully captured and successfully captured. But what was interesting to me, and I didn't realize I wanted perhaps viewers to feel this until the edit, is Joaquin explained to me, here he is in this prison where more than 40 people had been executed as well. It's a prison in Barcelona, many executions during the dictator Francisco Franco's reign. So a lot of political dissidents, right? And execution by garrote too. So it was not visually and emotionally not an easy thing. And so he's standing in the yard where this happened. And he actually says he's hopeful. And that, to me, just shocked me. I ask him on camera, I say, it's sort of strange for someone to feel hope in a place like this. But I think that's the essence of the film. Somehow, Joaquin has managed to find hope in the most unlikely of situations. So in this prison, he thought about how it wasn't too long ago that the death penalty was abolished in Spain. So we'll get there in the States. And that's what it shows him, is that here is a place that had really heavy state violence and it's overcome. And now it's a cultural center where you can go and you can learn and you can move beyond. And so then there's this visual with the camera that pulls out. It's a wide shot. And this just happened in the scene. And again, it was kind of cosmic. This light dapples into the camera that has almost a rainbow translucent sensibility, like a crystal fragmentation or something. And so as the camera's pulling out, you see this rainbow light. It just happened. It just was the vantage point of the sun, right? As he's talking about this hope and kind of these cross-Atlantic parallels. And I'm just like, wow, all right. So I hope that people see that and can appreciate that in the same way I did in the edit, sort of sitting there with my mouth agape.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. In the case with religion and in this case Catholicism, I'm try how you wanted to try to link that into the story. We weave this into your story, obviously through the chaplain.
Yeah, I mean, I'm often asked. I cover a lot of spiritual and religious themes in my reporting, in my documentary work, whether I work on stories about Muslims, about Catholics, about Hindus, any number of groups. And one of the kind of common ties is how spirituality or religion can be used as a force to transcend, to overcome. And in particular, this theme of forgiveness, right? How can you use forgiveness, let's put it this way, like so many of us walk around with this pain or this trauma that can't be undone, right? And regardless of where you fall spiritually, maybe you're Catholic, maybe you're Muslim, that question of forgiveness and how it can give you some sort of spiritual transcendence to move beyond, that to me is fascinating. And that was what I hope, that is what I hope people take away from this film is what can forgiveness offer to you? What is radical dignity? And, what are the next steps after that?
And I noticed that Joaquin was showcasing an organization, Witness to Innocence. Can you talk more about that organization?
Witness to Innocence is a fantastic group of death row exonerees who have collaborated, and then they do any number of presentations, media, various conferences, and they all gather to speak at length about their experience. They are phenomenal in that the people who comprise that group, they are ready again to speak about their trauma, to speak about their experience from the position of empowerment. Everybody there is a collaborator. It's exoneree run entirely. And I don't know, I just think what's interesting through them is you also can really get a sense, if you go to their website, you can really get a sense of just the diversity amongst groups of exonerees. You have people who have only been on death row for 5 years, which is crazy to say, only 5 years, right? And you have others who have been there half their lifetime. You have Sabrina Butler Smith, the first woman exonerated from U.S. death row, and she speaks very from the angle of a woman, and also just what are some of the concerns that she had beyond kind of needing some chaplain care or spiritual support, right? What are some of the health concerns that women have, particularly on death row, that are not being addressed to this day? You have a number of people who are from the Deep South who speak, who believed in the death penalty until they were then the victim of it, right? They were wrongfully convicted, the victim of a justice system that didn't do right by them, and they've changed their ways. And so there's a lot of these interesting conversations happening there and opportunity to engage.
Particularly the fact that you also portray Joaquin as a person who believed in it until he got on the system too.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to understand, he was 24 years old. He's a kid when he went on death row, 24 years old. And he grew up believing in the death penalty as well. He went to school. And they'd have presentations there. Police officers would come in and talk about how important it was and how much of a difference it made and how it kept society safe. And there he is believing in it. And then even on death row, he's like, yeah, well, maybe they just made a mistake with me. I mean, his case was kind of a mess, as the documentary definitely gets into at length. And so he's still believing in it while he's on death row, thinking, oh, maybe I was just kind of the exception. And then he starts to meet other people who are in similar situations, including someone named Frank Lee Smith, who spent 14 years on death row and proclaimed his innocence. He would scream he was innocent in the middle of the night. The guards would come to his cell and beat him to quiet him. And there was just no heart, no generally the majority of prisoners did not want anything to do with Frank Lee Smith because he was in for the rape and murder of a little girl. And so there is this notion that that's the bad guy, that's the worst thing you could do. But he claimed he was innocent. He was innocent. And only after his death, he died of cancer on death row, that they finally did DNA testing. He was exonerated and they discovered he was innocent. The person who had committed the original crime had gone on to commit two more crimes, right? Only at that point does Joaquin go, oh, wow, right? Oh, wow, I get it now. And he starts really campaigning aggressively to have the death penalty abolished across the world.
Wow. And in case I may have missed it, was for Joaquin's case, of obviously it's been years and so on. Did they ever
Yeah.
found the perpetrator?
They didn't find the perpetrator. And so that's what's so interesting about these cases is when there isn't the same political will, you don't have the same investment of time, energy, police resources. And it can become a very messy, tense situation, particularly for the victims' families, because here they are thinking they have some sort of closure, whatever that means, right? Or thinking they have a sense of who did it and they can at least have a general understanding of how the crime went. And then this happens and they're left with this void. And so there is this phenomenal organization. Healing Justice is what it's called. I encourage everyone to look it up. And I bring this up all the time when this question comes up. So Healing Justice, what they do in particular is they take two people, two lives that have been really disrupted by the same case. So it would be the exoneree, right? The person who was wrongfully convicted and the victim's families or the victim's family member, and bring them together and help them find support within each other and mediate and just find some sort of forgiveness within each other. If you can't ever find that person who did it, at least two people whose lives were destroyed by it can find some sort of community bonding and justice within that unit. I just think it's a brilliant thing to do.
That is brilliant, and what you created is brilliant yourself.
Thank you.
So, besides the FYC campaign, are you already in the works of your next project, or you're still thinking about what subject to tackle?
I have an idea. It's interesting. People are always like, just say it. Just say your idea, as crazy as it is, because you never know who's out there who may support you or have some suggestions. Just throw it out there. Okay, so as I mentioned, I had interviewed dozens of chaplains, and these were phenomenal conversations about some of these exchanges that they had on death row. And I thought about what could I do with all of this material? I mean, most people in journalism, maybe you make a podcast or you do something like that, but these stories are so rich. There's so much power in them. And I thought about vertical video and how there's a real search right now for new content that can fill that space, kind of short segments that have really powerful human messages beyond the serial soap opera stuff that's out there now. We know, we've seen some of those vertical videos and we've been hooked, but there's real potential here. So I imagine something similar to, say, In Treatment. I don't know if you've watched In Treatment, that show, but imagine just a camera and a conversation between a chaplain, a death row chaplain, and a prisoner at cell front. And it's just fly on the wall, minute and a half, and a series of these short, really powerful stories that are transmitted through vertical video and various social avenues. This is the story and the approach I want to take. This is absolutely what I want to do. And I think if I were to collaborate and bring actors in, it would be people who were either wrongfully convicted or former prisoners who've been released. So there's a real sense of family and connectivity there. And look, do I know anything about vertical video? Do I have any right to be talking about narrative work as a documentarian and journalist? Probably not. But hey, I'm just going to throw it out there because these stories are just too important not to tell.
That is the wonderful thing about being a documentary filmmaker is that you started with something and in the end it comes out better. So
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so who knows? Who knows what it will be? Well, Linda,
Yeah.
let me wrap it up with one last question with you. As people, especially during the season, is going to have a chance to watch The Window on Death Row. What is the one most important take you hope they walk away with?
Mm, I think two questions. This question of are we defined by the worst thing that ever happened to us? My answer is hopefully no. It's the first thing. And then the second is if, look, 200 people have been exonerated from death row in the past 50 years. Joaquin is just one of them. So if one innocent person can be killed on death row, should there really be any death penalty at all?
Hmm. It is something for us to contemplate and chew on. So, Linda, thank you very much for carrying this conversation about the window on death row, and please keep on pushing your film during this campaign season. So it's
Yeah.
wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your sensitive and amazing questions.
No, thank you. Next time.